All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Keith White, meteorologist and climate services program leader here at the Weather Service Austin San Antonio. I won't take up too much of your time today, but I have about 20 minutes of slides prepared to talk about what we can expect this spring as well as beyond. And I'll start actually by briefly reviewing the meteorological winter. Of course, that being December 1st through February 28th. It was overall a warmer than normal winter for us, which was to be expected with our third straight winter of La Nina. There were obviously exceptions. Many of you will remember the big pre-Christmas cool down that we had, as well as the historic ice storm just over a month ago. But those two events were not enough to bring down the temperature averages after several periods of well above normal temperatures. And so when averaged out, most areas between about 1 and 3 degrees above normal through that 3-month period. Precipitation-wise, it was drier than normal across the vast majority of the area, especially along the Rio Grande. Portions, especially from Eagle Pass southward, saw very little rain this winter. There was one flooding event that occurred in eastern Bexar and southern Guadalupe counties on December 10th that still shows up in the 90-day averages, and a few other splotches of above normal precipitation throughout the winter months. But on the whole, it was another season of below normal precipitation and above normal temperatures, which has been a very common story over the course of the last 3 years. Some notable stats: Del Rio had their second warmest winter on record and fourth driest winter, and at Austin Camp Mabry it tied the 9th warmest winter on record there. Much fewer freezing days than we saw in last winter, but still, ranging from 8 in Del Rio to 25 at Austin Bergstrom, which of course many of you know reads a little bit cooler due to its location in a valley on Onion Creek on the southern part of the airport complex. Moving ahead, before we look ahead to this spring, let's take a quick look back at what occurred last spring. It was, despite being climatologically the wettest season of the year in South Central Texas, it was a very dry spring for us regionally, centered, especially near San Antonio and northward into the central portions of the hill country, where rainfall deficits in many places just over that 3-month period ranged anywhere from about 2 or 3 inches to as much as 8 inches. It was also well above normal, and last spring Del Rio had their third warmest spring, Austin Camp Mabry their second, and many of you will also remember it was the warmest May on record for the vast majority of our area. May was incredibly warm last year. Now, just looking back over the last 90 and 180 days from this morning at precipitation, again, this area where we had some heavy rainfall on December 10th is about to fall off this 90-day map in about 2 days. That was that long ago that we had this more significant precipitation event in eastern Bexar and southern Guadalupe counties. But most of the region still seeing significant rainfall deficits. And over the last half year, 6 months, portions of Dimmitt County and southern Maverick County have seen less than 2.5 inches of total rainfall. And when looking at that as a percentage of normal, less than a quarter of their normal rainfall over that period. Obviously, our winter months are typically drier, especially along the Rio Grande, but even compared to what's a normally dry, we've seen continued drier than normal conditions there. Really only a few isolated spots over the past half a year that have seen above normal rainfall. And when we look at this in terms of rainfall deficits, going back to last spring, which again was much drier than normal, we're looking at 1-year rainfall deficits of over a foot in these areas shaded in red. So that's a pretty significant portion of our 33 county coverage area. And you can see some splotches in here in Kendall and in Comal and in Hayes counties, where these estimated rainfall deficits exceed 20 inches over the past year. And so, as many of you are aware, these have sort of manifested in well below normal levels in the Edwards Aquifer, in many of the area reservoirs, especially in Medina Lake, which is well below normal at its lowest levels since 8 to 10 years ago, and also low stream flows in our area rivers, and that will come back into play a little later in this presentation. So this slide I include every time talking about our climatology. So what do the averages look like in our region? And I'll start here on the right, looking at how our average temperatures increase through the March, April, and May period. Our average highs are only in the 70s right now, but they will rise by the end of May into the lower and even mid 90s, closer to the Rio Grande by the end of the spring. Precipitation, we're starting to see an upswing in average monthly precipitation, with May being the wettest month of the year on average for all of South Central Texas. We're also ramping up into our primary severe weather season. So we've already had a couple of big hail events here just in the past week and a half. We will see, obviously, continued chances for severe weather through the spring months, significantly higher instances of our reports of hail and tornadoes than in any other season. And we'll also slowly ramp up into our time period when we see more flash flooding, which you can see on these yellow bars really maximizes in May and in June. So just a quick look at the short-term outlooks. We're obviously expecting, on average, near to above average temperatures here over the next week. We'll have some rain chances over northern portions of our area tonight, but after that, looks to be dry through the end of this week. And then as we head into mid-March, there's not a strong signal for South Central Texas, maybe a hint of some lingering above normal temperatures in western portions of our area in the early part of the valid period here from the 14th to the 18th. And then, near normal temperatures favored from the 16th through the 22nd. But with a low signal, this is the lowest lean of 33 to 40% chances of above normal precipitation for most of our region, the 16th through the 22nd. We'll have to see how that plays out, but at this time, no significant rainfall events are forecast over the next week, and we'll see what happens as we head into mid-March. In the longer term, as many of you are keenly aware, our weather over the winter was strongly influenced by the continued La Niña conditions. And after 3 straight winters of La Niña, as of this morning, officially, the last La Niña advisory was issued by the Climate Prediction Center. And what that means is that La Niña conditions have ended. And so you can see here on this sea surface temperature anomaly map in the bottom right, we're starting to see now even some above normal temperature anomalies that drive this Enso, which stands for El Nino Southern Oscillation cycle. So we're returning to neutral conditions for the time being. However, the prediction is for about a 47% chance, basically a toss-up between neutral conditions continuing this summer, June, July, and August, or transitioning into an El Nino. And those odds for an El Nino then, quickly ramp up to over 60% for this fall. And there are some indications that this forecast might even be a little bit conservative when looking at some of the dynamical and statistical models that are used to predict, the Enso cycle in the longer term. Part of the reason for that conservative estimate is that we're sort of right on the precipice of predictability being higher. In the spring, usually predictability of the Enso cycle is lower because we're so far away from the next season, but certainly looking at pretty decent odds for El Nino development later this year. And I'll briefly touch on what that will mean for us beyond this spring at the end of this presentation. So coming back here and looking at the March, April, and May period, what this map is sort of a composite of a bunch of the neutral years over the past several decades. And I've looked at this in a number of different ways, using just years similar to this, where we're coming out of a La Niña, using years where we were just in a neutral state through the winter and continuing into spring. And no matter how you slice it, the historical records show typically warmer than normal conditions, especially over the western portions of south central Texas. Maybe a little bit of a lower signal for temperature trends closer to our coastal plains areas. This is a model solution of what it thinks will happen over the course of the next 3 months. So this is different from the last slide, in that the last slide was looking back at the historical records. This one is one model solution from the climate forecast system. And this does show at least some warm anomaly of 0.5 to 1 degrees Celsius, which is sort of approximately 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit on average over the next few months. This is much lower of a signal than what we saw the last few springs during what was still La Nina conditions. But we're still seeing some sort of carryover, some lingering impacts of La Nina at this time, and those will likely continue to wane throughout the spring. This next slide is sort of similar to the last one, except it's based off an ensemble of longer-term climate models. This does include the last model, the CFS, but it has many, many others. And it does show odds leaning in that 40 to 60% range of above normal temperatures for our region through this is for the April, May, and June timeframe. The March, April, May is no longer available as it's now moved ahead. Now that we've sort of covered what the models think about temperatures, I would like to talk briefly about what our neutral state might mean for severe weather. So this was an analysis done a little while ago of some of the severe weather reports that we get broken out by the Enso category. And you can see that that La Niñas do typically have an increased instance of severe weather, particularly of hail, but neutral years in the past, and this is sort of dominated by a few outliers, have shown the potential for an increased threat of tornadoes and potentially also damaging winds. Again, we're heading into our primary severe weather season, so regardless of the state of El Nino, severe weather is one of our primary weather concerns throughout the spring months. So, take this this breakdown with a little bit of a grain of salt, and expect some severe weather, obviously, off and on throughout the course of the spring. In terms of rainfall, this is similar to what I just showed for temperature from the CFS model. And I've shown it with the skill mask on. So any of these areas that are grayed out means that the model doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of skill. But for South Central Texas, it does. And what this model is predicting is generally near normal precipitation for March, April, and May. There's one pixel there you can see that does show potentially some wetter than normal conditions, but with just one pixel, just barely a wetter than normal, that's not necessarily a very strong signal. So generally near normal precipitation predicted by this specific model, but that's agreed upon in the NMME ensemble. No clear signal for above or below normal precipitation for South Central Texas. Looking at the actual mean values of this, there is a slight lean towards wetter than normal conditions in April, May, and June. Those highest probabilities of wetter than normal conditions are dominated by just a couple of the models that make up the ensemble, and are really shown highest in the month of May. With May already being our wettest month of the year climatologically, above normal precipitation in the month of May may increase our chances potentially for flooding, particularly flash flooding. So that's something that we'll need to keep in mind and keep a close eye on later this spring. Backing up just a little bit, what I'm showing here is a time series of the percentage of our 33 county area that's been in drought, dating back to the summer of 2019, just before our 3 years of La Nina started. And you can see, our drought has ebbed and flowed. There have been periods where we got decent spring rains, here in 2020, and then especially in 2021. Many of you will remember a little bit more mild summer in 2021, thanks to late spring rains, increasing our soil moisture, allowing more of the sun's energy to go into evaporating that soil moisture, and keeping the strong subtropical ridge a little bit more at bay throughout that summer. Then, of course, there's last summer, and last summer was excessively hot. There were, well over 60 100-degree days in Austin and San Antonio. Droughts expanded significantly, with extreme and exceptional drought covering, more than 90 and more than 60% of our area at one point. And we did see some improvement in sort of the August and September timeframe of last year, but the drought didn't go away, and those longer-term deficits that I showed earlier, especially over the San Antonio area and the Central Hill Country, those are still around, and the drought has stuck around for a significant amount of time in those areas. So looking ahead, I showed the model data, but here's the official CPC outlook for March, April, and May that was issued a few weeks ago. The new one for April, May, and June, I believe, will be out a week from today. So if you're interested, be sure to check that out on the Climate Prediction Center homepage. But likely above normal temperatures on average continuing through May 31st at about a 50 to 70% odds. That's in this area here, sort of in the middle of the distribution. For a 3-month outlook, you're really never going to see anything super high. But this is definitely a strong signal for warmer than normal conditions likely continuing on average. And then equal chances for below, near, or above normal precipitation. And again, even near normal precipitation in our wettest month of the year will certainly go a long way towards helping to improve those aquifer levels and reservoir levels. It will take a lot of rain to bring us back to normal in some of those respects, but some improvement to drought could occur if we're able to see near or above normal rains late this spring. But speaking of drought, here's our sort of current state. Recently, the area of extreme and exceptional drought has expanded a little bit more across the Western Hill Country, with about 31% of the region in at least D3 status, with the lone exceptions being sort of east of Austin and then in portions of the coastal plains. All but about 11% of South Central Texas is still in some form of drought. Most of this dominated by the longer-term impacts, but it has been dry through the winter. And if this dryness continues longer into spring, we'll see more of those short-term drought impacts to things like agriculture continue to increase. And so the outlook for the month of March that came out on February 28th was for those areas that are currently not in drought, in the yellow areas here and the white area, to likely fill in by the end of this month. And that drought, isn't going away by the end of May, most likely. We could see some improvements, like I said, but the expectation is for drought conditions to remain in place through the end of May. So one of the impacts of that is dry soil moistures. And we're seeing dry soil moistures both at shallow depths of 10 centimeters and at deeper depths of 100 centimeters per some of our satellite data. The CPC percentile data shows an area mainly over the northwestern portions of our region below the 5th percentile for this time of year in soil moisture. And this could have some impacts for fire weather as well. Really quickly, I just wanted to show this map because it'll show the breakdown of the areas that are used for the data I'll be showing on the next slide, and that is these energy release components. And so just really quickly to explain these, this gray line on each of these is the normal value, the average value. The black line is so far this year, with the green showing the forecast for the next week or so, and the dotted blue line being last year. So across these regions, we do have above normal energy release component, meaning drier than normal fuels. and trending upwards in the forecast with dry and warm conditions over the last week or so, and continuing mostly through the next week. Not quite near record values, not quite as dry as it was last year in some areas. The South Texas area here, closer to those higher values of last year at this time. What this means is that especially after frontal passages where we get that dry continental air moving in and those stronger winds, we will see continued elevated to critical fire weather conditions. We'll likely end up needing more red flag warnings this spring in those times when we have those high winds and those low relative humidities. But looking at the longer term, the National Interagency Coordination Center outlooks issued earlier this month do show, the continuation of above normal wildland fire potential through March, but then, bring that back down to near normal in April. And then I don't have it shown here, but also in May and in June. So then here's my sort of last slide before I wrap up. Just to touch a little bit on what El Nino could mean for us should it develop. And like I said, the chances are about 60% for development this fall. Typically, in an El Nino hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin, there are fewer overall hurricanes due to some stronger vertical wind shear in the region, greater atmospheric stability. This doesn't mean that we couldn't see a landfalling hurricane in Texas in an El Nino year. But it does definitely lower those chances somewhat. And then it would increase the chances of wetter and cooler than normal conditions in Texas this fall and winter. Typically, El Nino has the opposite impacts on the jet stream and our storm tracks locally as La Nina did. So instead of shifting that further to the north, it typically brings those storm tracks down through Texas. And again, these impacts maximize in the late fall and the winter months. So, no expectation of wetter and colder than normal conditions in the spring or even, likely in the summer. So just to wrap up and summarize, expecting above normal temperatures likely through the end of May. As of right now, the chances of flooding are pretty low in the short term. However, as we look ahead, that lean towards the potential of maybe some wetter than normal conditions in the month of May. Something to watch. May is already wet, so wetter conditions then could, increase our chances for flash flooding. Given the antecedent dryness, not necessarily expecting a high level of river flooding impacts, but again, it really only takes one big event, something like what we saw in 2015. Where a foot or more of rain falls in a small area over a short amount of time, and we'll still see some river impacts from that. But given the antecedent conditions, and, maybe a slightly below normal incidence of river flooding, especially over the next month or so. Severe weather, we're heading into our primary severe weather season, so expect severe weather to be a concern for us. And then fire weather, probably above normal impacts in the short term due to those drier than normal conditions we've been seeing, but likely trending more towards near normal due to the spring rains that we're expecting. And I just want to wrap up with something. I'm going to quote the WCM down in Brownsville, Barry Goldsmith, who recently said, as the weather gets hotter and drier in the coming months, our key concerns are going to be wildfire prevention, water supply issues, and then pre-summer heat stress on people, animals, and crops. And so with that, I will close. Thank you all for your time today. And I'll repeat, we'll be sending out a recording of this presentation and the slides to our entire partners list later this morning. I am available for any questions via the questions box. Please enter them if you have it. All right, I'm not seeing anything, but I'll leave this open for another minute or two just in case. But otherwise, thanks again. Thanks again for sticking around. I will see you again in about 3 months in early June for our summer outlook. Tim, I see you have a question. I will stick around here for you to put it. There we go. Can you elaborate on the severe weather outlook for spring? What can folks expect? Well, like I said, spring is our primary severe weather season. We do see some severe weather in our region every spring. That will mean large hail of larger than an inch will occur in some areas. That will mean damaging straight line winds above 60 miles an hour will occur in some areas. And just like every spring, we can't rule out there being some tornadoes. Obviously, an event like March 21st of last year is a little bit abnormal. We don't see events like that every year, and we don't necessarily expect to see an event like that this year. But those kinds of events happen most often in our springtime months. So obviously, everyone should be prepared for that possibility. Not every location will see severe weather every spring. The nature of thunderstorms, especially of the supercellular type thunderstorms, are that one area can get hit really hard. Well, just 10 miles away, they didn't see much of anything. But everyone in South Central Texas should be prepared for the possibility of severe weather impacting them in the spring months, just like with every year.